what the Court of Appeal ended up deciding in discussing this was, oh, well, the priority policies, in some ways you could say, aren't all that important. And in particular, they took the priority policies and took them apart and ended up deciding that the city doesn't exactly have to follow them. So I want to go through a little bit about what the court's reasoning was, how they reached it, and what that means in terms of, does Prop M still mean anything? At least that part of the priority policies. And then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, if, and I think I'm going to sort of foreshadow what I'm going to tell you, which is that the court essentially said they don't really mean very much. And so what I'm going to, the second thing I'm going to talk about is what can we do to have as it were, a daughter of Prop M that might actually mean something, and that the Board of Supervisors and the city might actually have to follow, rather than being able to sort of wave their hands at and say it's okay. So let me start with talking a little bit about what did Prop M have. So it had 8 priority policies. I'm going to just read them off. That existing neighborhood serving retail uses be preserved and enhanced, and future opportunities for resident employment in and ownership of such business enhanced. Number 2 was that existing housing and neighborhood character be conserved and protected in order to preserve the cultural and economic diversity of our neighborhoods. Number 3, that the city's supply of affordable housing be preserved and enhanced. Number 4, that commuter traffic not impede muni transit service or overburden our streets or neighborhood parking. Number 5, that the diverse economic base be maintained by protecting our industrial and service sectors from displacement due to commercial office development, and that future opportunities for resident employment and ownership in these sectors be enhanced. Number 6, that the city achieve the greatest possible preparedness to protect against injury and loss of life in an earthquake. Number 7, that landmarks and historic buildings be preserved. And number 8, that our parks and open space and their access to sunlight and vistas be protected from development. So those all sound like really worthwhile goals. They all sound like things, yeah, those all sound good. Why shouldn't we all be supporting that? What the court said was, well, yeah, these are all nice things, but they're all kind of vague. So when you say, for example, that existing neighborhood serving retail uses be preserved and enhanced. Well, what do you mean enhanced? That future opportunities for resident employment and ownership of such and ownership of such business be enhanced. Okay, enhanced, well, by how much? Does that mean, like, across the whole city, we have to at least provide one opportunity for a new business to be owned by residents? What's the how do you judge whether something's consistent with that or not? That existing housing and neighborhood character be conserved and protected. Okay, how are we going to judge neighborhood housing and character? How are we going to judge that in terms of saying, is this conserving, is this preserving it or not? Does this mean, for example, as we were asked in the courtroom, in the Court of Appeal, does this mean you can never tear down any existing housing because it all has to be conserved? What happens if you want to build affordable housing? This was another question that was asked, because the next one is that the city's supply of affordable housing be preserved and enhanced. What happens if you want to enhance the supply of affordable housing, but to do that you've got to tear down some existing housing? What do you do? So this is the kind of issues that the court raised and says, you know, it's really hard to know what to do in these situations when you've got these kind of vague policies and you've got policies that could end up being in conflict with each other. So how do you decide which one you favor? And of course, I've read you all 8 policies. That's basically what it says. It doesn't give you any guidelines or guidance about, well, what if the two are in conflict? How do you decide if there's a conflict between 2 policies, which one you choose? So essentially what the court did was it fell back on some standards for determining, well, you know, what does this mean? And how do we interpret this, and what is what's called standard of review? How do we decide whether something's consistent or not? And some of what they used to make that standard was they went to court cases that actually hadn't even been decided yet when Proposition M was approved by the voters. So they went to some court cases that were decided in the 1990s. Remember, Prop M was approved in 1986. They went to some court cases decided in the 1990s, and those cases said, oh, well, you can't have something be consistent with every policy in a general plan because there's hundreds of policies in a general plan, and it's obviously almost impossible to be consistent with everything. You're going to run into a problem somewhere or another. And so what the courts ended up deciding, again, after Prop M had been passed, was, well, as long as it's overall consistent with the policies. And what does that mean? Well, does that mean it's got to be 50% plus one of the policies? Does that mean that, well, as long as it kind of feels okay? Again, not really much in the way of guidance there. But what the court said is, well, as long as it's overall, and we're going to give the Board of Supervisors a lot of leeway in making that decision as to whether it's consistent or not. So we're going to, because they are the legislative body, and what they, in fact, what they said in arguing about this was, in one of the cases, they said, well, because the Board of Supervisors is who adopts the general plan, then they are the ones that have to implement it. So their decision of what it means should be given a lot of deference. Well, of course, in this case, the Board of Supervisors didn't adopt these priority policies. They were put before the voters, and the voters adopted them. But the court said that's not important. What the court said is look, these people have got to be given a lot of deference because they are in charge of the city, and they have to implement what the general plan says. And so if they say this is what it means, we should defer to what they think the general plan means.